I wasn't supposed to hear them. The wind had quieted just enough. The lake, usually my comfort, sat still and complicit. From the top of the hill, standing just behind the porch screen, I could make out every word. Their laughter echoed down the dock, sharp, easy, careless. June's voice was the first I heard. My daughter. My only child. She was laughing. Dad's just a placeholder until the paperwork's done. A placeholder. Alan, her husband, answered with the confidence of someone too proud to whisper. We should start calling it our place. He barely uses the main floor anymore. The master bedroom's basically empty. I stood there in my own home, listening like a ghost. They didn't know I'd come back a day early from town. They didn't know I'd paused in the driveway when I saw two unfamiliar cars. Or that I'd taken the back path up, through the cedar line, where Lillian and I used to walk after dinner. They didn't see me because I'd learned long ago how to disappear in my own house. The lake house. That's what we always called it, but to me it was never just a house. It was the proof of every hour I'd worked through winters. Every weekend I'd missed June's school events so we could afford materials. Every night I'd come home with sawdust in my hair and Lillian would pull off my boots by the fire. It was the place I scattered her ashes. The place we built with our hands. By next summer, Alan continued, we'll have permits filed. I've already talked to a guy about knocking out the back wall. Open concept, lake-facing bar. And the garden, June said, giggling now. We can finally tear out that overgrown jungle. No more elderberry bush. I stared at that bush. The one that bloomed late every summer. The one where I buried Lillian's wedding ring, beneath the flat river rock that bore her name in my handwriting. Their words kept coming, each one a chisel to the ribs. He's lucky we even let him stay here this long, Alan said. You know, after everything we've covered. Food. Repairs. His meds. I mean, June agreed, he wouldn't last a week on his own. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the certainty in their tone. The way they'd already rewritten the narrative, that I was dependent. That I owed them. That this home, this sanctuary I built from nothing, was already theirs in everything but name. My hand gripped the wooden railing. The same one I'd sanded 100 times, running oil over it like prayer. I didn't interrupt them. I didn't come down the steps or shout or shake my fist. I just turned, quietly, and stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me, softer than their laughter, quieter than the lies they told each other. And in that silence, something old in me died. But something else, something I hadn't felt in years, began to wake up. I wasn't confused. I wasn't weak. And I wasn't a placeholder. I was still the man who'd built this house with his bare hands. And now, I would decide what stayed, and who went. The first time I saw the lake, I was 27. It was dusk in late September, and the trees along the shoreline were starting to turn. Gold and copper flickered against dark water like embers caught mid-fall. Lillian stood beside me, her hand wrapped around my elbow, wearing that rust-colored sweater that still smelled like firewood 20 years later. Can you see it? She whispered. A little cabin. Right here. I'd only ever dreamed of things I could afford, worn boots, second-hand tools, a house with thin drywall. But Lillian saw something different. Always did. I didn't answer right away. I just looked out at the water and nodded. We bought the land 6 weeks later. Back then, it was just us and dirt. No plumbing, no frame, no promise of what it could be, only what it meant. I drew the plans on butcher paper. She marked the kitchen window with a wine bottle and a fork. We built it slow. Summers. Weekends. Nights when we were too tired to talk, hammering by flashlight until mosquitoes chased us back into the tent. Lillian taught English at the high school. I ran a small framing crew. We lived paycheck to paycheck, but every spare dollar went to lumber and nails and old fixtures salvaged from estate sales. I didn't mind. I liked watching it come together, beam by beam, like something permanent in a world that never stopped shifting. June came along halfway through the build. A colicky baby who cried unless we brought her to the lake. She'd settle the second we carried her out on the dock. That's how we knew, this place would be her home too. By the time she turned 5, the house had walls and heat and a roof that didn't leak. We'd painted her bedroom pale yellow and built a swing between 2 trees out back. Lillian filled the shelves with old books, her handwriting tucked in the margins. I carved her name into the porch railing the day we installed it, Lillian, 1995. It's still there, if you know where to look. We didn't have much, but God, we had peace. Holidays were spent here. Summers too. June learned to swim before she could tie her shoes. I'd find her asleep on the dock with her head in Lillian's lap, freckles blooming across her cheeks like petals. We made memories the way you make stew, slow, warm, a little messy but always from scratch. Then came the phone call. Stage 4. Liver. Lillian took it the way she took everything, quietly, with grace. She kept teaching another 6 months. Then she came home, to the lake, and never left again. I bathed her in the clawfoot tub we installed together. Fed her soup in the kitchen she once danced through barefoot. Every day, she grew smaller. I read her favorite novels aloud, even when she couldn't respond. Even when the only sound in the room was the wind rustling the elderberry bush outside the bedroom window. The day she died, I wasn't holding her hand. I'd gone out to refill her prescription. When I came back, she was gone. The nurse said it was peaceful. I never forgave myself for missing her last breath. I buried her ashes under that elderberry bush. No grave marker. Just a flat river stone we'd found together during our first spring at the lake. I wrote her name on it with a chisel and a rusted set of carving tools. Some things aren't meant to be fancy. Just honest. June was 23 by then. Engaged to Alan. They came up after the funeral. Stayed for a few days. Helped with the service. Promised to visit more. They did visit, at first. Holidays. Long weekends. June always brought wine, Alan always brought ideas. We could really open this place up, he said once, tapping the ceiling with a folded brochure for skylights. You're sitting on a goldmine. I laughed. Thought he was kidding. I should have known better. They came more often after June's promotion. Alan started working remotely, calling it a working retreat. They rearranged the living room, swapped the dining table. June said she wanted to make it feel more welcoming. I didn't protest. I thought, if this is how they show love, I'll take it. The first summer they stayed more than I did. Just to take care of things, June said. You could use a break. I let them. I trusted them. I let them pay for groceries now and then. Accepted their offers to fix the plumbing. Even gave Alan access to the utility account when he insisted the billing system was outdated. And slowly, without ever making a sound, the house began to change. New curtains. New lighting. Some of Lillian's books disappeared from the shelf. The tea tins she loved were replaced with Keurig pods. The porch swing was unsafe and removed. One day, I came back from town to find my recliner missing. Alan smiled. We just thought something more ergonomic would be better for you. The new chair was stiff, clean, ugly. It squeaked when I sat. That night, I stood in the hallway, staring at the space where my wife's books used to be. I told myself not to make a fuss. That this was still my home. That I was still welcome. That family was worth the discomfort. But deep down, I'd started to wonder. Wonder what they saw when they looked at me. Not a father. Not a builder. Not a man who spent 20 years turning wood and sweat into something real. Just a placeholder. A name on a deed. And one day, they'd stop pretending altogether. The word shouldn't have stung so much. Placeholder. A word you'd use for an empty chair. A draft email. Something waiting to be replaced. Not a father. Not a man who spent 3 decades sweating through winters to keep food on the table. Not someone who built the house they were sitting in, by hand, beam by beam, before they were even born. I replayed June's voice in my head for days after that conversation. Not the soft, sweet one from childhood. Not the one that used to call me daddy in oversized pajamas and ask if I'd read her just one more chapter. This voice was sharper. Detached. Like she was discussing a business asset. Something she was waiting to inherit. We could tear out the garden, she'd said. Get rid of that bush. The bush where I buried her mother. They didn't just forget what the house meant. They erased it, one suggestion at a time. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a mug of tea that didn't taste like anything. The room looked different now. I saw all the things they'd changed, the soulless backsplash Alan had insisted was timeless, the overhead lights that flickered too bright, the soundless Bluetooth speakers mounted in the corners. Even the table we were sitting at, I'd built it for Lillian's 40th birthday, and now it was covered in Alan's finance magazines. My chest tightened. It wasn't just about the house. It was about how easily they'd convinced themselves I didn't matter. That I wouldn't notice the reshuffling of my life. That my silence meant approval. That I was lucky, grateful, for being allowed to stay in my own home. They were already living like they owned it. Alan changed the locks last fall, for safety. He offered me a new key. A single key. One that worked for the back door only. We don't want you to lose it, he joked. Simple's better. The main keyring, the one Lillian and I used for years, sat now in a drawer I wasn't allowed to open. I started noticing the signs. When I'd ask about mail, June would say, "Oh, we've been getting it forwarded, just for now." When I'd ask about bills, Alan would shrug. "Don't worry. We're managing the paperwork now." Managing. They'd begun saying things like, "our space, our investment, once we take over officially." They never said what they meant. They didn't have to. Every decision, every suggestion, every quiet omission, they all pointed to the same truth. They were planning for a future where I wasn't there. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and saw June speaking with a man in a blazer. A realtor. Alan saw me and said quickly, "Just a consultation. We're exploring options. Nothing final." I didn't ask questions. I just watched them from the hallway. That night, June sat across from me on the porch, her voice syrupy and slow. "Dad, have you ever thought about retiring somewhere more manageable? There's a lovely senior living community near the coast. They have game nights. Walking trails." She smiled like it was a gift. Like it wasn't a thinly veiled eviction. "It's time we started planning," she added. "For everyone's peace of mind. Everyone's but mine." I nodded slowly. Sipped my tea. And stared out across the lake. That's when I realized, they thought I was already gone. Not dead, not yet. But mentally gone. Slipping. Fading. They confused quiet with decline. Dignity with dementia. Because I wasn't loud, I must not be listening. Because I didn't argue, I must not understand. They were wrong. I remembered every invoice, every nail, every blister from building this home. I remembered how Lillian laughed when we burned the first batch of muffins because I'd miswired the oven. I remembered June's 6th birthday, when I carved her name into the back of the bench and she squealed like I'd given her the moon. I remembered promises, both the ones I made and the ones they didn't keep. The betrayal wasn't one moment. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Every small decision they made without me. Every kindness they turned into obligation. Every word spoken just out of earshot, until it wasn't. They thought I'd let them erase me. But I was still here. And now, I wasn't just listening. I was watching. And I was ready to act. The day after I heard them on the dock, I didn't speak. I made coffee like usual, 2 scoops, a pinch of cinnamon the way Lillian used to like it, but it tasted flat. I sat at the kitchen table, watching the sun rise through the bay window, and I didn't touch the cup. The birds still came. The chipmunk still darted across the porch railing. But everything felt suspended. They'd gone back to the city that morning. June waved as they left, keys jingling on her wrist like a trophy. "We'll be back next weekend," she called out. "We'll bring that guy Alan mentioned. The contractor." I nodded. Not because I agreed. Because I had nothing left to say. After they were gone, I walked the perimeter of the house. Not for exercise. For something else. I touched the corner beam where I'd carved the build date with a chisel in '94. I ran my hand along the edge of the porch railing Lillian had sanded until it felt like silk. I paused in front of the pantry door, where June's height had been marked year after year in pencil, the top of each line dated in my handwriting. Still visible. Still mine. Inside, the silence wasn't peaceful. It pressed down like snowfall, soft, but suffocating. I pulled out the photo albums. The old ones. Not the glossy kind. The kind with peel-back plastic and fading Polaroids. Lillian's handwriting curled in the corners, first summer at the lake, 1997. June's first fish, barely bigger than her hand. I flipped through the pages slowly. Each one held a moment no one but me remembered. Me, and the woman they now wanted to erase from the walls. I traced my fingers along a photo of Lillian standing beside the garden, her hands covered in soil. That same soil now rested over her ashes beneath the elderberry bush. They wanted to tear that up. Overgrown, June called it. Messy. No. It was sacred. I closed the album and just sat there. Staring at the kitchen wall. At nothing. The old clock ticked, soft and steady. The same rhythm I'd fallen asleep to for years. Now it sounded like a countdown. I didn't cry. Not then. Not yet. Instead, I went to the basement. Not out of habit, but because I needed to feel close to something that was still mine. The workbench was just as I'd left it, neatly labeled jars of screws, a rag folded over the vise, the faint scent of sawdust clinging to the air like memory. I ran my hand along the surface. My hands remembered the feel of tools more than they remembered touch. There was a file folder tucked beneath a stack of sandpaper. Old receipts. Lumber orders. The original deed. My name. Lillian's. No one else's. I stared at that paper for a long time. Not in anger. Not yet. Just, wait. The full weight of a life reduced to a footnote in someone else's future. They didn't even know. Alan, with his open concept nonsense. June, talking about tearing down beams that still held her childhood breath in the grain. They had no idea what this place was. Or what they were trying to take. It wasn't just grief I felt. It was something quieter. Like the light after sunset, fading, but not yet gone. I wasn't ready to fight. Not yet. But I couldn't pretend anymore. That night, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark. No television. No music. Just the sounds of the house, the creak of old floorboards, the shift of wind through trees, the steady tick of the clock that had outlived both the girl it sang to sleep and the woman who wound it faithfully every Sunday. Around midnight, I stood up. Walked into the bedroom. Opened Lillian's old jewelry box, still on her dresser. Her wedding ring rested inside, wrapped in a piece of lace from our first anniversary dinner. I hadn't touched it since the funeral. But tonight, I held it in my palm like a promise. Not to her. Not yet. To myself. I stood there, unmoving, until dawn broke. And for the first time since I heard my daughter call me a placeholder, I spoke aloud. They don't get to do this. I woke with purpose. Not with rage. Not with bitterness. Just clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes when you've lost something you can't get back, and finally accept it. I made coffee. Real coffee. The kind Lillian used to make, French press, strong enough to stand a spoon in. I drank it on the porch while the fog still curled across the lake. The air was cool, but not cold. The kind of air that made you want to build something. Or maybe, dismantle it. My phone sat face down on the table beside me. It buzzed around 8:13 a.m. A message from June. June, can you send us a copy of the deed? Alan wants to start the paperwork for the refinance. Nothing urgent. I stared at the screen for a long time before locking it. There was no fury in me. Only resolve. I went inside, walked to the kitchen drawer beneath the oven mitts, and pulled out the original folder. Inside was the deed, signed by both me and Lillian, dated in ink from a pen she insisted we keep in the glove box. That was the day we closed on the land. I remembered everything about it, what she wore, how the wind tousled her hair, the way we'd both cried when the papers were finally stamped. And there it was, my name. Sole owner. After her passing, everything transferred to me. No co-signers. No clauses. No added names. No Alan. No June. They assumed, I realized, that kindness equaled surrender. That because I wasn't confrontational, I must be complacent. They'd forgotten I was the one who carried beams up the hill one by one. The one who calculated every angle of the roofline. The one who held Lillian as she took her last breath in the very room June now called dated. And I'd forgotten too, for a while. But now I remembered. I picked up the phone, not to call June. I called someone else. Todd Fisher. Estate lawyer. Old friend of a neighbor. Lillian and I had met with him after her diagnosis, back when we were putting things in order. I still had his card. I'd kept it in the same drawer as our wedding photo, tucked behind the worn receipts and warranty papers no one ever checked. He picked up after 2 rings. Mr. Hayes, he said, voice calm and curious. It's been a while. Yes, I said. But I think it's time we met again. I'd like to talk about selling some property. Quietly. There was a pause. Of course, he said. You'd be surprised how common that request is. I wouldn't, I replied. We set a meeting for Friday morning. The moment I hung up, the silence in the house shifted. It no longer felt heavy. It felt alert. I spent the rest of the day walking through the house. Not as an old man with soft memories. But as a builder surveying his work for the last time. In the hallway, I touched the trim Lillian painted herself, color name, Sun Tea. In the guest room, I stood beneath the ceiling fan Alan once called quaint, and remembered how hard it had been to install without a second pair of hands. In the bathroom, I turned the faucet June had wanted to replace and listened to the pipes hum, still smooth after 22 years. This wasn't just a house. It was a body. Every board a bone. Every corner, a memory. And I was about to let it go. That night, I opened Lillian's jewelry box once more. Removed her ring. This time, I didn't just hold it, I wore it. On a chain around my neck. She'd always been the brave one. The bold one. But tonight, I would borrow her courage. I didn't answer June's second message. Or her third. The next morning, I dressed in the charcoal suit I'd worn to Lillian's service. Pressed. Quiet. Clean. I arrived 15 minutes early to Todd's office. Sat in the waiting room with my hands folded, watching a couple argue over who forgot to pay the parking ticket. It felt distant. Unimportant. When he called me in, Todd greeted me with a firm handshake and a knowing look. "You're not here to ask permission," he said. "You're here to begin." "Yes," I said. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing everything. The deed. The appraisal. The comps in the area. "If you want to sell quickly," Todd said, "we can go off market. Investors would line up for something like this. Especially with how well it's been maintained." I nodded. No open houses. No signs. Just clean paperwork. He smiled. "I'll draw up the documents." By noon, we had everything in motion. When I left the office, I didn't go home. Not yet. I drove to the overlook where Lillian and I had picnicked the day we finished the kitchen. The lake spread out below like a mirror, still catching the light in all the same places. I sat there for almost an hour, letting the decision settle. Then, I made one more call. A storage facility in town. I reserved a climate-controlled unit. Just large enough for the essentials. Because this wasn't just a sale. It was a departure. One they'd never see coming. I didn't do anything dramatic. No confrontations. No angry phone calls. Just a silent, steady unwinding of the life they thought they owned. First, I called the utility companies. Electric, water, internet. "Please remove Alan Reynolds from all authorized access." Simple. No need to explain. I had the deed. I had the rights. The woman on the other end of the phone said, "Of course, Mr. Hayes." Then I canceled the forwarding address they'd set up, for convenience. Started picking up my mail at the post office again. The clerk smiled when she saw me. "Haven't seen you in a while." I nodded. "I've been quiet. But not anymore." Next, I visited the bank. Closed the joint expense account June had opened under the pretense of streamlining payments. Transferred the auto payments for groceries, propane, and maintenance back to my name. That account had been draining my pension faster than I'd realized. Alan always insisted it was fair. He called it shared responsibility. I called it something else. Then came the locks. I hired a local locksmith I trusted, Carl. A man I'd known since the lumber yard days. He didn't ask questions. Just changed every lock on the house, the shed, even the dock chest. By sundown, June's key no longer worked. Neither did Alan's. I didn't leave a note. Didn't tell them what I'd done. They'd find out soon enough. 2 days later, I signed the sales agreement. All cash buyer. Quiet transaction. No listing. 30-day occupancy clause for the seller. Flexible close. Exactly what I wanted. Brian Connor, the buyer's agent, was young but efficient. He walked through the house with a reverent kind of silence. "This place," he said, "feels lived in. Not staged. That's rare." I nodded, but didn't reply. The next morning, I began packing. Not frantically. Intentionally. Just the things that mattered. Lillian's books. Our wedding album. Her old cookbooks with handwritten notes in the margins. The chair she used to read in. The quilt we made together our first winter. Everything else stayed. The expensive espresso machine Alan brought. The art June bought on impulse. The new, minimalist, shelving they had installed. All theirs, if the new owners wanted it. Otherwise, it would be donated. I reserved a moving van under my name and scheduled it for the following Thursday. Meanwhile, I rented a furnished one-bedroom near the edge of town. Not fancy. Just quiet. It overlooked the foothills and had a walking path behind it. That was enough. Then I waited. I didn't respond to June's texts. Didn't pick up when Alan called, twice on Tuesday, once more Thursday night. Instead, I wrote a short letter. To June. If you're reading this, it means you finally tried to come back. To the house. To the life you assumed would wait for you. It's gone now. Sold. Transferred. Closed. You'll find the new keys don't work. That was intentional. This house was never yours. It was built by hands you never asked about. Paid for by sacrifices you never saw. You treated it like a future asset, not a legacy. And you treated me like an expiration date. I heard everything. I forgive you. But I won't forget. This was my home. Now it belongs to someone else. I suggest you build your own. Love. Dad. I left the letter on the mantel, beneath a stone from the lake. By the time June and Alan returned the next weekend, I was already gone. They texted, then called, then showed up in person. Neighbors told me later they looked confused. Alan tried his old key, twice, before banging on the door. June circled the house, rattling windows. Someone called Brian Connor. He confirmed the sale had closed. Legally. Fully. Without cosigners. They were guests in a place they thought they owned. Their screams never reached me. I was sitting on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the sun bleed into the hills. Sipping tea. Not angry. Not bitter. Just free. The phone rang 8 times in 3 days. All June. Each voicemail more desperate than the last. Dad, what happened? The locks don't work. Call me. Then, we came to check on the house and someone else was inside. Please. We're confused. Finally, I don't understand. Why would you sell it without talking to us first? I didn't respond. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was consequence. A week later, I got a call from Brian Connor. He was amused. Slightly apologetic. They asked if the sale could be reversed, he said. They claimed there was a family dispute, and the house had sentimental value. I could picture Alan's posture, tight-jawed, arms crossed, rehearsing his reasonable tone. June probably tried to cry. Did they tell you I was mentally unwell? I asked. There was a pause. They hinted, Brian admitted. But we reviewed the documents. You were lucid, prepared, and signed everything willingly. I told them nothing could be undone. Good. I'd made sure of that. A few days after that, a notice showed up in my P.O. box. Alan and June had filed a complaint through a family mediation office. Not a lawsuit, just a concerned inquiry. A last attempt to control the narrative. It read like theater. Mr. Hayes appears to have acted under duress or diminished capacity. He may have been manipulated into selling. It is in the family's best interest to pause any further sale activity. The packet came with a self-addressed envelope, requesting my voluntary agreement to family-led mediation. I shredded it. They weren't asking for conversation. They were asking for control. And control, I'd finally taken back. Word got out in their circle. I don't know what they told their friends. Maybe that I'd gone off the deep end. Maybe that I was punishing them for a slight they couldn't remember. Maybe that it was all a misunderstanding. But some people knew the truth. Mrs. Latimer from next door texted me a week after the sale. They came storming up here like they owned the place. Tried to say they were reclaiming family property. I told them, that's odd, because Roy told me it was his name on the deed. They didn't like that. No, I imagine they didn't. Alan called again. Left a voicemail that sounded rehearsed. Legal. If you don't return this call, we'll have no choice but to explore further options. A threat wrapped in civility. I saved it. Forwarded it to Todd Fisher, who replied with a single line. Let them try. June didn't call again after that. Instead, she posted a long message on social media about boundaries, intergenerational trauma, and the emotional toll of caregiving. She painted herself as a daughter struggling to support an aging father with unpredictable behavior. Not once did she mention the house. Or the sale. But her message was clear. She was trying to spin the story. Friends commented with sympathy. Sending hugs. Family can be so hard. I'm here if you need to talk. I didn't comment. Didn't counter. Didn't reach out to correct the narrative. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about peace. Let them talk. Let them defend themselves in rooms where no one had seen the nights I spent recaulking the windows in a snowstorm. The days I carried Lillian from bedroom to porch because she wanted to feel sun one last time. The decades I sacrificed so that June could grow up with security she now mistook for inevitability. They'd lost something they didn't understand until it was gone. And me? I gained something I hadn't felt in years. Not pride. Not power. Autonomy. The silence now was different. No footsteps above me at night. No arguments about furniture. No polite negotiations over what traditions should be updated. Just a quiet little apartment. My chair. My books. Lillian's ring still around my neck. Sometimes, I walk in the mornings. The hills are gentler than the lake path, but still steep enough to make my knees ache. I nod to other retirees. Wave at dogs. Stop at the bakery for coffee. Last week, a woman sat beside me on the bench outside. Said she used to teach English. Said she once owned a house by a lake. We talked for an hour. The next day, she brought banana bread. The confrontation came quietly, on a Tuesday, 2 weeks after the house changed hands. I was sweeping the walkway outside my apartment when I saw them. June and Alan. Standing at the curb. Not dressed for a legal fight, no suits, no paperwork. Just June in a coat too thin for the cold, Alan with his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. They hesitated before stepping forward. I kept sweeping. Dad, June said softly. I stopped, leaned the broom against the railing. June, I replied. Alan nodded stiffly. We were hoping to talk. In private. I gestured to the bench nearby. You came this far. They sat. I didn't. For a moment, none of us spoke. Cars passed behind them. A bird landed on the rail and flitted away. I waited. Finally, Alan cleared his throat. You blindsided us. I raised an eyebrow. You sold the house without warning, he said. No discussion. No consideration. I stayed still. Calm. Did you think I'd need your permission? He blinked. June shifted uncomfortably. It was just, so sudden, she said. You didn't even say goodbye. It wasn't sudden, I said. You were planning the remodel months ago. Alan opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. You called me a placeholder. On the dock. While drinking wine in chairs I built. June's face flushed. We didn't mean. I heard everything, I said. Every word. Including your plans to finally take over. Silence. I took a breath. Let the cold air steady me. You may have thought I wasn't listening. Or worse, that I was fading. But I wasn't. I saw what was happening. The way you replaced my belongings. Replaced my memories. You didn't ask. You just assumed. Dad, June said, eyes glassy, we didn't mean to take it from you. We thought you'd want to move on. And why is that your decision to make? Her lip trembled. We thought we were helping. I nodded slowly. You convinced yourselves I was dependent. That I owed you something. You gave gifts with strings. Paid for groceries with expectations. And when I didn't meet them, when I stayed quiet, you took that for weakness. Alan leaned forward. So this is punishment? No, I said. This is boundary. You left us with nothing, he snapped. No, I said again, voice steady. You left yourselves with nothing. I gave you my trust. My silence. My home. You spent years using it, using me. The consequence wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. June's voice was smaller now. You could have told me you were hurt. I shouldn't have needed to. Alan stood abruptly. We'll never get it back, then. No, I said. And if you're asking about the money, no to that too. June looked up. Then what now? I folded my arms. Now, I said, you live with the house you didn't build, the history you didn't honor, and the silence you chose when you thought I couldn't hear. She looked away, blinking fast. I forgive you, I said, but we won't go back. That door is closed. Just like the one on the house. Alan looked ready to argue again, but June touched his arm. He stopped. She stood slowly. Her face was tired, older than I remembered. I'm sorry, she whispered. I gave her a single nod. Good. They turned and walked back to their car. I picked up the broom again. Finished sweeping the last of the dead leaves off my porch. I didn't expect peace to feel so plain. There was no triumphant music playing in the background. No moment where the sky cracked open in approval. Just quiet. Everyday quiet. And yet, it felt like breathing clean air after years underground. I started each morning the same way now. Coffee, strong. A walk down the trail behind my apartment. The air out here smelled like dry pine and distant rain. A different kind of quiet than the lake, but honest. I didn't rush anymore. There was nowhere I had to be. No one demanding keys, space, titles. I wasn't a placeholder. I was a person again. The apartment wasn't much. 2 rooms, a small kitchen, and a balcony that caught the western sun just right. But I'd chosen every object in it. Every chair. Every cup. Every frame. And I brought only what mattered. Lillian's photo. Her worn cookbooks. The wooden spoon with the burn mark from our first Thanksgiving together. The ring, still hanging on a chain around my neck, resting just over my heart. I didn't decorate with things, I decorated with memory. The neighbors were kind. Polite. They waved. They didn't ask questions. They didn't assume I needed help. They didn't look at me like I was something to manage. There was a woman 2 doors down, Elaine. Retired English teacher. She reminded me a little of Lillian, not in appearance, but in tempo. She moved slowly but with purpose, spoke softly but never wasted words. We had tea every Thursday. Not because it was a rule. Just because it started, and then neither of us wanted it to stop. She brought banana bread the first week. I brought blueberry jam the second. We never talked about our pasts in full. Just bits. She mentioned her husband in the past tense. I nodded. I told her about the house, but only once. She didn't ask for the whole story. She just said, sounds like it was worth building. I smiled. It was. Sometimes, I took the long road back from town. Past the hills where I used to work construction in my 20s. Past the church where we married. Even once past the old lake road, though I didn't stop. I didn't need to see it again. I already knew how it looked. And more importantly, how it felt to leave. Peace didn't arrive all at once. It crept in through small habits. Rereading Lillian's favorite books. Fixing a creaky drawer. Finding joy in peeling an orange with the radio on. Writing checks without worry. Paying bills without tension. Buying myself a new jacket, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to. Freedom, I realized, wasn't just about getting away from something. It was about getting back to yourself. One afternoon, I cleaned out the last of the moving boxes. Inside the smallest one, beneath a stack of old letters, I found the photo. The three of us, me, June, and Lillian, standing in front of the lake house. June's hair in braids. Lillian in that faded blue shirt she wore when planting tomatoes. We were all smiling. Not posed. Real. I looked at it for a long time. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel betrayed. I just felt thankful. Because once, we had that. And now, I had this. Not many people get two lives. But I did. The first, I spent building a house for others. The second, I built a quiet room for myself. Not out of wood. Out of boundaries. Out of lessons. Out of survival. And for the first time in decades, it was enough. They used to say I was just a placeholder. A man holding space for something better. A fixture too familiar to move, too quiet to notice. A shadow waiting to be swept away. But they were wrong. I wasn't holding space. I was holding memory. Weight. History. And when the time came, I let it go, not because I was forgotten. But because I finally remembered myself. Now I live in a smaller place, with fewer things. But every inch belongs to me. I make tea for one, and sometimes two. I speak when I choose. And I rest, not in someone else's future. But in the peace I built with my own hands. Because I was never a placeholder. I was the foundation. And they didn't see it. Until I was gone.